yourself. Yes, good afternoon. So we will start this panel with a hard talk speech, but that will be a highly specific hard talk. And let me invite Csilla Fedinec, the Hungarian Academy of Sciences from the Center for Social Sciences, Senior Research Fellow, and András Rácz, the Senior Fellow of this Institution for Central Asia and Russia. Let's invite the guests. This is a hard talk format, and a lot of people approached me and said that is going to be a hot discussion. Finally, you're raising some burning issues. Yes, we are raising burning issues, but from a different perspective. And this is the hard talk with experts and not politicians or representatives of the media environment. And we will use hard data, hard analytical information. We are talking to analysts about Hungary, of which we know a lot about in Zakarpattia, but probably we don't know enough. And the context of this knowledge is negative, because Hungary is always coming in the news about blocking assistance provision to Ukraine, blocking the integration, acceleration, as far as NATO is concerned. But at the same time, they are providing humanitarian aid, and it is via Hungary that humanitarian aid goes by transit. Hungary has supported Ukrainian refugees and supports different social infrastructure projects in Ukraine, building highways and seeing Ukraine as an important partner in the development of cross-border partnership. At the same time, on the basis of the results of the survey that we had at the Institute for Central European Strategy, 41% of Ukrainians do think that Hungary is the country which is our enemy because of the media representation, and 41% of our residents think that Hungary could also attack Ukraine or participate in the Syria of conspiracy, saying that in 2022 Hungary dislocated its army close to the Ukrainian border. So we have different versions in the media environment, in the political environment, all the more in Telegram chats and just people's talks. So no emotion involved in our talk, but let's speak about Hungary, about the Hungarian society, its attitude to Ukraine, and let's hear your unbiased, true-to-life stories, if they are even not pleasant for us. And my first question goes to Mrs. Csilla Fedinec. Let's start with the basic things. A certain milestone that changed cooperation between our countries was the year 2017, which was the introduction of the educational legislation. So what are the trends over the recent 7 years that have been dominating in the Hungarian society as far as attitude to Ukraine is concerned? How did it all change with the full-scale invasion? What is the current trend? Good afternoon to everyone. I really feel pleased that I have the chance to be present at this conference and that I can share some ideas with you. Don't try to scare any audience with Hungarians. I know what it means when you say, I'm from Ukraine. But let's have a look at us. We are from Hungary with no tails, no horns like devils have, and I can even speak your language. So to answer your first question, Andriy, I think I will provide some figures. Unfortunately, it's really true that the percentage of people who think that the EU should not support Ukraine financially is on the rise. And this figure is now more than 50%. This is the new data for 2024. We see the uprising trend, which is scary, but it's of interest that the number of people who would also not be eager to provide humanitarian aid to Ukraine is also on the rise. This share is 25% of our residents. But it should be added in brackets that Hungary, together with Slovakia, are following a certain trend whether to provide weapons to Ukraine or not. They claim no, by all means, but it's not exactly like that, because they are not providing weapons on pro bono principle, but they are providing it on a commercial basis. But Hungarian or Ukrainian media do not speak anything on that. I don't know why. Another statement as to why this audience that thinks that no aid should be provided to Ukraine, why does this audience think so? The largest share of people who don't want to support Ukraine is among the voters of the ruling parties. Why? Because the Fidesz party has introduced an innovation. They are not addressing 10 million residents of Hungary, which is the whole population of Hungary. They are just addressing 2 million people who keep voting for it. And these voters get information about the Fidesz policy via the state TV and radio. And of course, it's only official propaganda that you can find there. And I'm just showing these figures to you to understand this. Suppose you have Ukrainian news in the morning and in the evening, and in the Hungarian channels we have those news 24/7 and nothing more, just official propaganda. You hear it like zombie every second minute, and there is a significant barrier because nobody knows Ukrainian language there, and they can read only Hungarian press, listen to Hungarian TV and radio, which are state channels, and it appears that they get distorted information, and they don't think anything good about the neighboring country. They are not thinking at all, they're just following the position of the ruling party. But when we start speaking about that, we always think, why does Ukraine have such an attitude to Hungary? And I think that you should discuss that at the level of experts. Because, 30 or 40 million of people, of Ukrainians who live in Ukraine, are not a uniform mass. And Hungary is also not a uniform mass. We have the Fidesz ruling party, we have the prime minister, we have 2 million of their voters who voted for them, but there are also 8 million people who do differently and who think differently. Thank you, András. Here is the question for you. Could you please tell me, how does it work? How does this media technology and information dissemination works? Because it's kind of schizophrenia. On the one hand, in Hungary, we have a stereotype about Ukraine as an ineffective, failing state that is capable of doing nothing. But on the other hand, they say that Ukraine effectively limits the rights of Hungarians. So how is it possible? These are two different lines of activity.
I'm speaking English. The reason is that I'm halfway learning Ukrainian. I already understand and I can read, but I cannot speak properly. And before the full-scale invasion, I was okay with that. Sometimes I mixed in some Russian, all right. But since the full-scale invasion, I'm not doing it anymore. So please allow me to speak in English because I think that's more accurate and more polite. So thank you for the question and thank you for the invitation. Kind of a remark, kind of a footnote. Everything that I'm going to say here constitutes solely and exclusively my own personal opinion. So shall not be taken as the official position of the German Council on Foreign Relations, any organization or state. First thing, just to continue what Csilla said, it's a very important thing that in order to address and assess relations of Hungary and Ukraine, one needs to differentiate between the state and the society, actually from both sides. And when it comes to the Hungarian side, yes, the ruling party, which is absolutely normal from a political technology perspective, the ruling party makes the politics for its own voters. This is how politics works. But the society is way more differentiated. And even when it comes to the activities of the Hungarian state, colleagues, actually a lot more is happening than what is in the news. To give you a few surprising examples, all is public information. In the beginning of the full-scale invasion, several Ukrainian civilian aircrafts found shelter on Hungarian airfields. It was organized very much in advance. Should the Russians attack, then these airplanes could fly over Hungary and stay safe there. And this was properly coordinated with the Ukrainian side. When before the full-scale invasion, as Pan Andrei said, Hungarian army lined up, some units of the Hungarian army lined up along the border of Ukraine. This was not because Hungary wanted so. This was a measure of NATO. Everywhere on the NATO eastern flank, the same things happened. Baltic states moved their armed forces to the border with Russia. Poland moved, Slovakia moved, Hungary moved, Romania moved. This had nothing to do with any kind of conspiratological fears about Hungary's intention. This was an order coming from NATO, and that order was fulfilled. Fun fact, it was also coordinated very exactly by the Ukrainian side, what units move exactly where. I know because I was involved, in order to avoid any kind of misunderstanding. Another thing which is not in the news, but in some news it is, so it's public information, one can tell it, the fuel deliveries. Since in the Soviet times, there was a pipeline built from Zakarpattia to the central Hungary, through which the Soviets literally filled up their tanks. That pipeline has been operating in reserve order since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. I'm not allowed to tell you the exact amount of fuel delivered to Ukraine, but it's a lot. So perceptions and the reality actually differs a lot. But when it comes to politics, everyday politics, it's perceptions that matter. Now with Donald Trump elected, we know it very well, right? And when it comes to perceptions, one thing to add, which some people may not know properly, or may not just have in mind actively, when the full-scale invasion started, Hungary was in a uniquely vulnerable situation when it comes to domestic politics. Why? Because parliamentary elections took place 6 weeks after the full-scale invasion. And because the government of Viktor Orban has conducted a Ukraine-skeptical foreign policy already for several years, reasons is a different story, nobody could realistically expect that the Hungarian government would entirely change its foreign policy 6 weeks before the elections, right? This just wouldn't have been realistic. And because the government won the elections, again with a constitutional majority, how could have they possibly changed the foreign policy again 180 degrees? So domestic politics has a defining role, or has had a defining role in the beginning of the full-scale invasion. What happened in the last 2.5 years, that's a different story. I'm not going to go into that, at least right now. Two more things here, and then I just give back the floor. When it comes to Hungarian foreign policy, also towards Ukraine, the fundamental frameworks of Budapest's foreign policy is the EU and NATO membership, period. If you are a member of any of the alliance, you cannot go too much against too long. Yes, you can be a complicated partner. Yes, you can slow down things, you can sometimes block things, but what's happening is that gradually both the EU and NATO is actually finding the cure, finding the solution. More and more things in the EU are voted with a qualified majority, not with the votes of all member states. So the EU decision-making is gradually shifting to such a direction which will be able to handle if 1 or 2 member states are against the decision. In those cases when it's not possible, then remember the European Council December last year, when the Hungarian government blocked the financial aid for Ukraine. Then there was an extraordinary European Council in January, during which Hungary got nothing, literally nothing, but because all the big EU players sat down with Viktor Orban and had a nice chat over breakfast, Viktor Orban eventually agreed. So inside the EU, there are actually ways to handle it. So are inside NATO. So Budapest is a difficult partner, will probably remain a difficult partner, but this doesn't mean that one would need to overestimate the problems caused by Hungary. I mean, the EU and NATO is are way bigger, stronger players, and this is probably not going to change even with Donald Trump. So I would just call for like caution and be calm and pragmatic. There is usually a solution.
The question about revenge moods. These are marginal ideas, and they have not been in the mainstream. We are not special, we are not particular. But what is interesting about the official policy of Hungary is actually the point that it thinks in the categories of the national state. And also we think in the categories of cultural state when we try to take care of those Hungarians who are living beyond the borders of the country. And these are not just the words, and this is the program of the Hungarian government. And the question is what the governments are doing regarding these issues. This is just a different approach. Thank you for this answer and for several interesting facts for reflection. My next question is who is shaping the image of Ukraine in Hungary, apart from the official mass media? And you have been talking separately about the government and the Hungarian society. And very often Zakarpattia Hungarians become the hostages of the situation. Do you know about the needs of the Zakarpattia Hungarians there in Hungary?
Thanks. Let me start with the formulation of foreign policy. Csilla is the minority policy expert, so I'm not going into that. Just really a few words about who is forming Hungarian foreign policy and the perception about Ukraine. Colleagues, bad news. When it comes to the perception, the average Hungarian before the full-scale invasion had very, very limited knowledge about Ukraine. There is a reason to that. I mean, Hungary's foreign policy has been traditionally focused towards the south, towards the Balkans, for 1,000 years. When it comes to the east, while let's say Poland had has had a very detailed knowledge and understanding and everything of Eastern Europe. In Polish, there is even a separate word for it, Kresy, like the former Polish territories. For Hungary, the geopolitical understanding for centuries ended at Nizhny Vorota. What was further east, it was never really concerned for Hungary. So there is a lack of information. And if there is a vacuum is very easy to be filled by various conspirological ideas, various misunderstandings. So what I'm trying to say here, when it comes to the Hungarian perception of Ukraine, the starting point was not easy. And who is formulating the foreign policy and the perception? As Csilla explained already, the power of the state media apparatus can only be underestimated. Colleagues, it's extreme. There is only one national TV channel which is not under government control. Everything else is under government control. All the national radio channels are under government control. All the regional newspapers are under government control. The content is word by word the same. Hundreds of local and regional internet news sites are under government control. So it's very hard for the average Hungarian who is not an expert and not traveling here to get other information than the government narrative. And again, I'm not judging. Judging is philosophy, that's another job. My job is to describe things as they are, because this is what helps us taking properly and hopefully the decisions. So the starting point is not easy at all. But on the minority question, I'm not an expert.
And it's not only about the press and the mass media, but also about the academic circles. Throughout the decades, the only institution which was recognized as authoritative one by the average Hungarians was the Hungarian Academy of Sciences of Ukraine. It has its own research network, and in this research network there were many people. These people were just talking about something, mass media were distributing this opinion of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, and the people were just thinking, okay, it is said by the Hungarian Academy of Sciences, so that's true. And the authority of the academy was really great. And the government separated this research network from the Academy of Sciences about 6 years ago. And since that time, this research network has been changing names. And people actually cannot identify it now. So this research network lost its brand. And the government itself creates the system of pro-government institutions. And the first point for them is loyalty. Loyalty to those opinions which are voiced by the Hungarian government. And the common people do not understand and do not have the knowledge of Ukraine, but also they do not understand, for example, why Poland supports Ukraine. And I'm not talking about just common people. The very Hungarian government is trying to find the answer to this question. Why the Poland is a friend with Ukraine and not is that big friend of Hungary. This is something I usually talk about when I'm invited to similar events. After the full-scale invasion, lots of military experts are invited to talk to mass media because, well, there are no risks because they discuss the things in the battlefield and there is no politics in these discussions. But, well, support Ukraine or not to support Ukraine, people are afraid of expressing something against the government. In December 2023, Ukraine actually brought back its legislation to the year 2017, which actually was the point which caused some problems in our relationship. And Ukraine voiced its readiness for constructive dialogue. And I think that the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian society is actually in favor of promoting dialogue about the rights of the Hungarian minority, do it in a constructive way, and the Hungarian minority itself is involved in this procedure, and we see some grains of optimism. But why, since December 2023, when we have made some steps to improve our relationship, this improvement didn't take place? I will just tell you what I think about it. After December 2023, we had 2024. And at the beginning of 2024, you probably remember Peter Szijjártó had a meeting with Metro Kulaba, and that was their first meeting because they have never had meeting before. So when this meeting took place, it turned out that Peter Szijjártó gave a list of 11 points related to the rights of the of the Hungarian people here in Ukraine, and said that these 11 items should be done for Hungary to support Ukrainian Euro integration. And then negotiations started, but these negotiations were happening behind the sidelines. Nobody knew what was discussed and how it was discussed, but later people said that the results of these negotiations will be enshrined in the agreement between the states, and there won't be any problems in all those issues. In my opinion, such an agreement, which nobody knows about, is probably not really good, because it means that we have to throw away the agreement that dates back to 1991 that regulates the relationship between the two countries. Well, you can rewrite that agreement, you can use some new words, but you cannot add anything else. And what happened next? The President Zelensky said that we are preparing the bilateral document between Ukraine and Hungary. It addresses many concerns, many current challenges, many challenges of the past, and we have a very positive view of the document. But the matter is, and this is my opinion, Hungary just wanted to wait till the American elections, and I actually want to see this bilateral document, but so far I, well, do not have access to this document. Thank you. My next question will be about practical steps. You know Ukraine, you know Eastern Europe. If you were an ambassador of Ukraine to Hungary, so if you were this ambassador of Ukraine to Hungary, what 5 practical steps would probably improve the image of Ukraine in Hungary? What should be done in order to ensure it at the level of...
So, Ukrainian ambassador to Hungary? Well, there's a line for that, right? This feels a bit odd. So who am I to give advices, right? I think if I were to design a strategy, one, diplomacy is the art of the possible. Realize what are the frameworks that cannot be changed and do everything within those frameworks. So first and foremost, I think the most important thing would be to actually have an ambassador. Because for a long time there is no ambassador. And not having an ambassador is bad for bilateral relations. It's also bad, not having a Ukrainian ambassador in Budapest in the time when Hungary is having the EU presidency. Sorry, colleagues, it's a mistake. This should have been solved earlier. So the first and foremost is to actually have an ambassador. Still going to the embassy part, if I were to design a strategy, I would make sure that all the personnel changes that need to take place or don't need to take place, doesn't matter. Please make a decision. Many of your diplomats in Budapest have been hanging in the air for years. They don't know whether they can stay, whether they can go home, what's going to happen to them personally. This is never helpful. So there are some technicalities to sort out. And once that's done, once there is a functioning embassy, properly functioning everything, from then on, a lot better understanding of the Hungarian internal dynamics could possibly be fostered. What do I have in mind? Imagine, for example, the Ukrainian embassy ordering detailed public opinion polls about the Hungarian society, to have an understanding of the social dynamics inside the society. Because in order to design effective bilateral diplomacy towards a country, you need to understand the society. Ordering a public opinion polling is not that expensive. For 10,000, 15,000 euros, a very decent polling can be done. But for that, of course, some resources are needed. And exactly as Csilla said in the beginning, one needs to differentiate between the government and the society. Government policies from the Hungarian side are unlikely to change. Now with Trump winning the elections, Viktor Orban thinks that he was right. Technically speaking, he was right. I'm not happy that he was right, but he was right. So the government policy is unlikely to change. But there is a lot to work on with the society. When it comes to public perception, translating Ukrainian literature to Hungarian, fundraising campaigns, humanitarian campaigns, a lot of things could be done, but for that, first and foremost, a functional embassy is necessary. I hope this is an answer.
I also would like to add that the knowledge of the country where you go is the foundation, but you should know just more, not just the language. Well, if I don't know where I live, I won't be able to do something. I won't be able to go from A to B. So, in order to make the atmosphere a bit easier, I would just say what I do. I would analyze what you were doing. The last question, probably. Lots of people in Ukraine hope for a new relationship with Hungary and on the new political party. We are grateful for the humanitarian support. So would it be reasonable for Ukraine to establish the parallel communication with Hungarian opposition, or probably it would just hamper the current relationship? The ties and connections should be established with all the parties, but when the situation is really acute, we should work with the parties which are in the parliament, either in the EU parliament or in the Hungarian parliament. Talking about Peter Mader, we should understand not only ourselves but also our partners. The attractiveness of populism is because it sounds really nice. We are a family who won't like this slogan. I think that now we do not have expert opinions about Ukraine. And one of the reasons of this success is that it does the same what Fidesz does, but they say that they are doing it not for themselves, not for their families, but for the entire country, for the entire population. Thank you very much for this talk. Thank you for the constructive dialogue. Csilla, Fedinec, and András Rácz.